Okay. Today, in Hashem, we're going to do our last piece on Halacha Ches. And we're talking about, we're going to start with, excuse me, the Rama said, but it's not so important to remember the case. There had been a case that was not chayiv in tevillah because someone used it for cutting paper. It was a kli that was going to be used for cutting paper, and the Rama said, "Aval Rishon, wherever also l'shamash b'le tzorch esud afilu derech harai b'lo tevillah, aval v'shlach lo tzorch chlafim." He had bought it for paper, for cutting paper, and it doesn't need tevillah because of that. That's not a food use. But if he chooses to use it derech harai in a way that is used for food, then he's mechuyev to tevillah. Which is what the Rama holds, as you know, or you may know, that the Rama holds that if you're going to use something even occasionally in a way that needs tevillah, then you're mechuyev in tevillah. And in contrast, there's a Pri Chadash. Many people know about this. There's a Pri Chadash who holds that we follow Roiv Tashmishay. You say if the main use is a way that it's chayiv in tevillah, then it's chayiv in tevillah, and if the main use is not chayiv in tevillah, then it's not. So he says what the Rama says that if you can use it derech harai for a way that's tevillah, he doesn't agree with that. He disagrees with that. Okay, so first I'll mention to you two of the, I don't want to use the word proofs, but sort of proofs that the Pri Chadash says. Pri Chadash says, one thing he says, in Hilchas Hagolos Keilim, this is actually very relevant to Pesach, in Hilchas Hagolos Keilim, there's a machlokes whether you follow Roiv Tashmishay or Miyut Tashmishay, which is to say, I have a kli that I use most of the time as a kli sheni, so I can kasher it in the kli sheni. Once in a while I use it in the kli rishon. So the Mechaber holds that you follow Roiv Tashmishay, based on most Rishonim, you follow Roiv Tashmishay, which is to say, it's mainly used as a kli sheni. You can kasher it as a kli sheni. And the Rama says, we're machmin to be choshesh from Miyut Tashmishay, that since you occasionally use it as a kli rishon, you have to kasher it as a kli rishon. See, he says, the Pri Chadash says, he says, that machlokes is by Hagolos Keilim. By Hagolos Keilim, there's a clear logic to say that you should follow Miyut Tashmishay. Because if something becomes straight even one time, you have to kasher it. Even if you one time stuck it into, a milk spoon and place pot, you have to kasher it. He says, so the logic says you should follow Miyut Tashmishay. So over there are even people who say you follow Roiv Tashmishay. You don't follow Miyut Tashmishay. Kol Shekain, that over here they would say you'd follow Roiv Tashmishay. So you see that we judge things by the way they're generally used. We don't worry about little details. He says, so if over there you could say, over there the Svara says you should follow Miyut Tashmishay, the simple Svara says you should say that, so Kol Shekain, they would say that over here. Okay, that's one of his things that he says. That's ignoring. Very good. That's exactly what I'm about to say. So he's ignoring that the Rashba explains. The Rashba Taki is the question. He says, what kind of sense is it that we follow Roiv Tashmishay? Where they come from? To which he explains that the svara for that is that when you kasher kli, it's Eini Ben Yomer. It's only chiv drabanan to kasher there, because it's Eini Ben Yomer. So you're kashering because it's Eini Ben Yomer. So Chacham said, when you think about how to kasher it, just think about the main way you use it. Chacham didn't want to make things so difficult for you. They said you're doing the drabanan to do it to kasher Eini Ben Yomer. So fine, go ahead and kasher it just by Roiv Tashmishay. Okay, that of course makes no sense to Tevillas Keilim. For Tevillas Keilim, there's a chiv to kasher to tevillah no matter what. There's no possibility of saying it's Eini Ben Yomer, it's a drabanan, that kind of stuff doesn't fit in place like that. Okay, the other thing he says is something that we've mentioned, which is the other thing he says is he says I have a raya from the case of a stovetop grate, a tripod he calls it, or what we call stovetop grate, that you don't have to tevel it. You're not required to tevel that stovetop grate because it doesn't touch food, it touches the pot. So he says, he doesn't explain. We're putting words into his mouth. He doesn't say what his raya from there is. He says, what do you mean? He says, doesn't food spill onto there? He says, how do I know the food spills onto there? Go look in Aruch. I don't know if he says you looked there, but go look in Aruch. You'll see that for Pesach we're machmir to kasher them because of the possibility that food spills onto them. So, of course, everybody knows that. You go into a kitchen, you see that food spills onto a grate. You don't have to open up an Aruch to know that.
That's a lot different, right?
And because
that's not intentional use.
So the difference that we explained back then is that if that's not an occasional use, that's an unintentional use. That's no one's trying to use it. I'm not okay. That's a second angle of it. First, it's unintentional, and if everything that falls, it goes into the garbage. Nobody eats the food that spills onto your plate. What did I gain from the fact that I wasn't using it? Okay, that's a different angle. I didn't think of it like that. Okay, I didn't even use it. You're saying it spilled there. My potato fell onto there. I didn't by mistake. Fine. So anyhow, this is the Pri Chadash says. If that's what the Pri Chadash says, that you should follow Roiv Tashmishay when you decide whether you need to tevel the kli or not. And then there's a what we could call a compromise shita, which is Aruch Shulchan. And he wants to say, he even thinks that the Ramah agrees to this. Okay, that's really hard to believe that the Ramah actually agrees to what he says. But he says it depends. He says it depends. If the person, if the secondary use is either common, or the secondary use was something that the person planned from the beginning, that's what he had in mind when he bought this thing, that's what he was planning to do with this thing, then it's Chayv in Tevillah. But if it's mamash a rare use, and it's like no one had thought of using it like this when they bought it, then you're not mechuyev in Tefillah's camp. Okay, he really essentially is agreeing with the Pri Chadash. He's just saying only in certain cases. Okay, so I'm going to show you 4 cases, just because I like this pictures. 4 cases of where there's occasional use, just to bring out these different shittas we have. Okay, the first is a spoon. Okay, somebody bought a spoon. They bought a spoon, but they bought this spoon not to eat their cereal with. They bought a spoon for gardening use. Okay, that's what they're going to do. They're going to use it to stir up their flower pots. Okay, and once in a while, that person's going to take that spoon, and they may end up eating some food with it. Okay, but basically that's not what it's for. Okay, the spoon that they bought the spoon, they bought it lachter klafim. Okay, they bought it in order to use it for non-food use. They're using it for garden. Okay, next is a pocket knife. Okay, I'm going to show you the different cheetahs after I explain you what my cases are. Okay, a pocket knife. The person has a pocket knife, uses it for cutting a piece of wood, other things like that, all kinds of stuff. Once in a while, if he's stuck on a camping trip and he needs to cut an apple with it, then he may use it for that also. Okay, but basically, the pocket knife is used for all kinds of stripping wires, whatever he wants to do with it. Okay, the next is a box cutter. Okay, the same kind of a thing. It's meant for cutting boxes, for cutting open things and like that. But again, on an occasional use, the guy's has to cut a carrot, he'll wipe it off, and he'll cut something with that also. Okay, and last is a screwdriver. Okay, the guy's got this. I couldn't get a picture of a long enough screwdriver. I don't know why it's flashing like that. But I don't know. Okay, but I'm not sure what that's for. But the guy's got a screwdriver, and if he gets really stuck and they can't stir the pot of the container of lemonade, okay, they need something really long to stick with. So when the mother's not looking, they stick the screwdriver and they stir the lemonade with that. The what? Well, that might not be chayv in Tevillah anyhow. Just let me find it. Okay, so all these 4 cases I gave to you, these 4 things these are things that Rov Tashmishay is obviously to use it not for food. Okay, in each one of these cases, the Rov Tashmishay, but there's a difference between them. Okay, and they were in a progression. And that is to say, starting with the spoon is inherently made for eating. That's what it's for. Okay, it happens to be that I decided to use it for gardening, but inherently it's made for eating. Okay, and as we move through the cases, in the case of the pocket knife, okay, a pocket knife, the etzem, that's a knife. Okay, it's a knife for cutting things. Most people use a pocket knife not for cutting food, but the etzem, it's a knife for cutting. A box cutter is a cutting instrument, yeah, but by the nature of it being a box cutter, it's not meant for cutting foods. It doesn't even enter in your mind really that it's for cutting foods. And of course, the screwdriver is the furthest from that. The screwdriver has no shaykhs to be used for food just because some Shulchan decides to use it like that, and it's furthest from that. Okay, so like this. The way I see it is like this. According to the Ramah, all of these things would be chayv in Tevillah if you decide to use it for food, obviously. Okay, the person decided to use it for food, maybe the screwdriver, I'm not convinced he'll say about the screwdriver. Maybe that's mom's off the wall. But I'm not sure if the screwdriver. But all the rest of them, the fact that I decided to use even my box cutter, I decided to use it for food, so then it's chayv in Tevillah. Okay, according to the Pri Chadash, none of these things are going to be chayv in Tevillah because Rov Tashmishay in all these cases is not. But the Aruch Shulchan, this is going to bring out the difference with Aruch Shulchan. He would say that the spoon and the pocket knife I would think are chayv in Tevillah because the spoon and the pocket knife are the etzem, things that are meant. When you get these things, you understand that they're meant. They could be used for food. That's a reasonable, at least secondary use for you to use these things, as opposed to the guy who buys a box cutter and a screwdriver has no shaykhs to when he's buying that. They should say, maybe I'm going to use my screwdriver for some Meshuggah reason. Okay, it's not a common use either. It's the rare nut that's using it.
If you bought it for that use.
Or if it's a common use,
For you.
Common for you.
If you bought a spoon system for your flower pot,
right?
It's not common for you.
So I would think that even point to him that the common use for the spoon is. So I had this in mind, but that I should use the thing is not off the wall. It's not,
It's not common for me. I bought it for that.
Even for me, I don't know that if I need to, I'm going to use it for my tea. Or
Depends on the guy. If
Okay.
the person buys the spoon versus flour buy it.
Okay.
It's common that people use pocket knives for food.
Yeah, to me, in my mind, that's a common use. They use it for different. They use it for different things.
I think it depends on the person. I don't know.
Well, it very much depends on the person. I was just using it as examples. What?
Also, to cut strings.
To cut things around the house. To cut things you come in contact
Right,
with.
different people. Okay, different people use it. All these things are very much dependent on the person.
The phone doesn't have one.
Okay. All of these are very person specific. Okay, so now, in
The brachas too, that's all we're discussing now.
if so, I'll say something now. I'll answer your question. Because the Chacham Sodom and others, Chacham Sodom says specifically that we should pass like Dharma. Chassidus says it as well. We'll talk about that later. Shafta told me that we should do like that, and my impression is that the common practice is to do what the Rama says. If you look here in Shulchan Aruch, everybody on the page, again, Pri Chodesh on the side, aside from the Pri Chodesh, everybody goes along with what the Rama says. The Tevillah means Tevillah with a bracha. What?
Tevillah, we're not going to Tevillah with bracha.
Of course you Tevillah with bracha.
No. It wouldn't be Choshen to Pri Chodesh.
So there are people who are Choshen with Pri Chodesh. Some people who say, well, we Choshen and do that. Do that a bracha. Say that a bracha. That's not. I don't believe that that's what most people say they're supposed to do. Again.
It's a good so bracha use the things that you want to use it one time. A guy says, "What do you think?" You just grab something, use it. No, you're not going to do it.
So like the Rama says that you have a scissor that uses cutting paper, and if you derech haroy decide to use it, you move to table. So it could be
infrequently, regularly.
That's what the Aruch Shulchan tries to say. That it's by no means is that the simple way to read what the Rama says. So again, if you use a screwdriver, it could be that's like way more close.
What's the makeup?
What? I'm about to tell you. What?
Doesn't have the handle. You can't use a screwdriver on the handle. The handle's plastic.
If you use the handle part of it.
You can't use a screwdriver on the handle. The handle's plastic. So
no, the other way around. The other way around. If part of it is chayiv and tevillah, then the whole thing comes out, even the plastic. If you, so to speak, have to play with, you have to play with even the plastic part of it.
I mean, you're I'm just giving, we take an iron and heat pizza on it, right? Mm-hmm. Is that what people use a screwdriver?
We'll talk about electrical appliances soon. Don't worry. A different day. Okay. So now, you
can't use an iron.
Okay, so now the truth is, if you really look into it, you could argue that the Ramah comes from Issa v'Heter. Okay, right? You could argue that the Issa v'Heter doesn't agree to everything I just said. Okay, I don't think that's what the Ramah says. Okay, and that is like this: the Issa v'Heter is talking about this is the Issa v'Heter is talking about this din. But there's another Issa v'Heter a few sifim later. Okay, we spoke about this, which is like this. It's really the beginning of this din. It's the Issa v'Heter which is the beginning of this din, which is like this. If I buy a kli that's meant for, I have in mind not to use it for food use. The klach I'm using it for cutting paper. And then I lend it to somebody who chooses to use it for food use. Okay, so the Mechaber said, the Mechaber said, if I lend it to somebody else, and that person decides to use it for food use, it's not chayiv and tevillah. Because I'm the owner, I decide what its use is for. If I'm using it for paper, it doesn't make a difference that he's using it for cutting other things. That's what the Mechaber holds. The Taz and Shach, we spoke about, the Taz and Shach bring that the Issa v'Heter argues on that. And the Issa v'Heter says, no, if the guy who borrows it chooses to use it for food, it's chayiv and tefillah's keilim. We explained it then that the Issa v'Heter is saying like this. As soon as I buy a kli, that is a kli that essentially is a food type kli, like a spoon. Okay, I bought a kli that essentially it's meant for using for food, then it's sort of already chayiv and tefillah's keilim. The fact that I choose to not use it for food, that's like holding back the chiyuv. I'm choosing to not use it for food. I'm like holding back the chiyuv. But basically, it was chayiv and tefillah's keilim. In the store, like if you go to the store and you say to him, which of these things need tevillah? The spoon is one that needs tevillah. The fact that I'm not using it for tevillah, so I'm like sort of holding it back from being chayiv and tefillah's keilim. Once it's basically chayiv and tevillah, with just a little thing holding it back, then the guy who borrows it, he can make it chayiv and tevillah. Okay? The guy who borrows it can make it chayiv and tefillah's keilim.
It's not as clean.
So he said, so the pshat is that the owner already had something that really was chayiv and tefillah's keilim. It was just temporarily, it was like something holding it back. anybody could get it past that, over that hump. If that would be true, that is what the Isra says. So if so, when a person uses something occasionally, he has a clean that basically is for lachter chlofim, and I occasionally choose to use it for food. Maybe he doesn't mean to say that no matter what, even though Kashrus Aruch makes you chayim tevillas Keilim. He just means it's a kli that really has a food use. And when I bought it, it was sort of chayim tevillas Keilim already. I was just holding it back, just like the borrower could get it over the hump. So my derech Aruch use can also get it over the hump. Okay. If that would be true, then only the spoon, then the Isra only talking about a spoon. By something else, if I have a box cutter, when I bought it, it wasn't sort of chayim tevillas Keilim, it was a box cutter. It had no shaychus to tevillas Keilim. Then he might hold that the derech Aruch use is not enough to make it chayim tevillas Keilim. So that's in the Isra Heter, l'shitasa, might not hold like that. Okay? The Ramah, as I just said to you, doesn't hold like the Isra Heter. The Ramah, when the Mechaber brought the din about a person who borrows it, the Ramah does not agree with that Isra Heter. Okay? So in the l'shitasa, the Isra Heter might hold sort of like the Aruch Shulchan, that only the spoon would be chayv derech Aruch. But the Ramah, who does not hold that, the Ramah holds that when you lend it to somebody else, that person is not chayv tevillas Keilim, would not hold to this l'shitasa. Okay, I hope that wasn't too complicated. Okay, anyhow.
But maybe the Ramah needs an Aruch use. You know, this is another use of this thing. If you just did it a mikra yitzchak one time.
That's what the Aruch Shulchan wants to say. That's not the simple way of understanding it. That's not how everyone's talking about it.
How do you know that? Why? It makes I like it. It's like muktzah comes in this.
Okay. Next, we'll go on. There's a case that I thought when I started was an example of this thing. Okay, this machlokes, the Ramah and the Pri Chodesh, that I thought was an example of this thing, and that was the glass tray in a microwave. Okay, the glass tray in a microwave, which is like this. We've seen in the past that if a person, in order for something to be chayv tevillas Keilim, it has to have direct contact with the food. Okay, we saw that some time ago. It has to have direct contact with the food. So when you use a microwave, when you put food into a microwave, it's a glass tray. Well, glass is chayv tevillas Keilim, so you have a glass tray. And if I put food into a bowl or onto a plate before I put it into the microwave, then there's no direct contact. If I put the food right onto the tray, right onto the glass tray, then there's direct contact, and then similarly it should be chayv tevillas Keilim. Okay? So the question was, well, which one is considered normal? Now, of course, everybody's different, but we're trying to get just a general feel for what was different. Okay? So we took a survey. Okay? In December, we made a survey. We sent the survey out to Baruch Hashem, the series has about 5,000 Twitter followers. We sent it out to them saying, could you guys do us a favor, whoever's out there, and answer a survey for us about how you use your microwave tray. Okay, we're just trying to understand how they use it. We had about 85 people responded. Okay, this was the question. Okay, do you put food right onto the microwave tray without a plate? Okay, that was the question. Do you put it right on? Okay, and we gave them 5 choices, and this is how they responded. Okay, we gave them choices. It wasn't like open-ended. Okay, we gave them choices. Okay, and this is what they said. Okay. We said, how do you use it? Okay, nobody said they always put it right onto the tray. Okay, and more than half the people said they never put the food right onto the tray. Okay? And the middle group of people, which is about half of the people, said that they basically do it sometimes. And on a napkin, as you understand, we had said at that time, I forgot to mention that, we said at that time when you put it just on the napkin, that's considered that you're putting it onto the cleat. The fact that there's a little napkin in between does not mean that it's not considered not on the cleat.
The tray means the glass?
On the glass, yeah. On the glass. We spoke about it a different time. Okay, so it's nothing. It's tough to the thing. So what it turns out is that a little more than half the people never do it. So obviously they're not chayv tevillas Keilim. But for most of the people, for about close to 40% of the people who occasionally use it in a way that seems to make it chayv tevillas Keilim, then they would depend on this machlokes. According to the Ramah, that you occasionally use something in a way that's chayv tevillas Keilim, they would be chayv to tevillah that glass. According to the Pri Chodesh that says that you have to go by road teshmi, assuming that the people are really like this. A person who says I use it 15% of the time. This is not one person, but if you're a person who once in a while puts it right onto the thing, then you would not be chayv tevillas Keilim. According to Aruch Shulchan, seemingly in this case would agree.
What you microwave? Should defrost something?
So I'm coming to that. Very good, David. Okay. Good to have you here. Okay, so this is the original thought that we had, and actually we then told these people, based on this, we think that if you ever use it for put the food right onto it or right into that, then you chayv tevillas Keilim. So that was the first thing. came along Rabbi House. He wasn't happy. Okay, he wasn't happy. He had a question. He says, you're missing something over here, which is like this. We spoke about a different time. We hadn't yet spoken about that, but we spoke about a different time that Rav Moshe talks about a pop-up toaster. And Rav Moshe says when you have a pop-up toaster, it's not chayv in tevillas keilim. And his reason was, he says to be chayv in tevillas keilim, it has to be either something that you eat with, like a fork or a spoon, a plate, or it has to be something that you use to make food from not edible to edible, to do something significant to make the food, to cook the food. Okay, it's a Gemara that pots are chayv in tevillas keilim, but he says it has to do something significant. And he brings out from the Gemara that even cooking water is considered a significant improvement. But something not significant, like in his case, making toast, is not considered significant. So you don't eat out of a toaster, and making it from bread into toast is not considered significant. So in the toaster is not chayv in tevillas keilim. That's what Moshe speaks about it. So Rabbi Nihal said, he says, well, what do people do in the microwave? Okay, what do they do in their microwave? If they're just defrosting food or they're just rewarming food, that's not a significant change. So they're not eating from it and they're not doing anything significant. Now people do cook in the microwave. He says, so really the question is not, do you ever put food in the microwave? The question is, that's not something that's chayv in tevillah. Do you ever put something right onto the tray in a way that's chayv in tevillah? I mean, do you cook on the microwave? Okay? In other words, to say, when you take a potato and stick it right onto the plate and cook it straight, or do you put things, when you put them onto the tray, right onto the glass, do you do that only for rewarming and like that, and for defrosting? Okay? So we did a second survey. Okay? We did a second survey. Okay? In this one, we asked them, if you would put food right onto the tray, or put it right on top of a napkin, would you do that for cooking, defrosting, warm? What would be your reason for that? Okay? And here, it goes like this. Okay? He said, none of our, we got like 40 people to respond or so. Okay, none of them said that they cook food right onto the tray, right on the glass or right on a napkin, okay? They always put it on the plate. Those are the people who we spoke to. Again, this is very person specific. Okay, and there are some people who never put food on the tray. About half the people, which is similar to before, and about half the people said we never ever put food right onto the tray, okay? But about half the people also said when they do put food onto the tray, which is like what we saw beforehand, that roughly half the people put food right onto the glass.
A warming or a cooking? What's it?
We said, do you
first one is cook food on the tray, never. The other one's about warming.
Right, warming and defrosting. I put those together. Warming and defrosting.
Warming is not cooking.
Right. So the middle group, the second and third group, the 20 and the 31%, that middle group, those are people using it on the tray in a way that's not, according to Moshe, are not chayv in tevillas keilim. Okay, so that is to say, even though in the survey, or the original survey, it looked like these things, it should be chayv in tevillas keilim, because you're using it in a way, occasionally using it in a way that needs tevillas keilim, using it right onto the tray. It turned out that wasn't really true. Really, the people using it on the tray are not using it in a way that's chayv in tevillas keilim. They're using it on the tray in a way that's just to warm up the food. Rav Moshe said that's not enough to make it chayv in tevillas keilim. Yes, you could disagree with Rav Moshe, but assuming you follow what Rav Moshe said about the pop-up toaster, then it turned out that none of the people who were looking at would be chayv to tevillah glass.
Would Rav Moshe say that, if you were dealing, again, just to borrow from Hilchos Shabbos for a second, if I'm dealing with like a soup, where we would say, yesh bishul afa bishul, for Shabbos purposes, because, you really like cooking it over again. So when people are warming food, they're not, drawing a distinction here between solids and liquids.
Right. But in our mind, we figure that if you're warming up soup, you're probably not putting it right onto the glass.
Oh, okay.
We're guessing that nobody put soup right onto the glass.
But you might also have a very liquid, I guess if it's a liquid.
As soon as it gets watery, then they're going to do that. Right. The best we can come up with like a potato. You might take a potato to cook on straight, but as soon as it gets watery, it's not going to be. Unless you're a real slob. It doesn't really like.
Does tevillas keilim have anything to do if it's considered bishul? Meaning, let's say if your whole microwave is not considered bishul.
It doesn't depend on that. No. Okay. So that's the end of this. There's another. So again, let me just to summarize before I move on. Just to summarize, if you're a person who totally uses your microwave, put the food straight onto the tray to cook. If they such a thing, you take the potato and you put it right on. Think about it in a restaurant. They probably just put it right onto it. Or person does it in their house, they put it straight on. Then that glass would be chayv in tevillas keilim according to the Ramah, probably according to Aruch Shulchan also. If you're a person who doesn't ever cook food on it, you just warm food. If you never put food on the microwave, it for sure doesn't need tevillah. If you put it on there just to warm or just to defrost, straight onto it or just onto a napkin, then as per Moshe of the pop-up toaster, it would not be chayv tevilas kelim. Okay, now.
Even the website still says that the glass plate requires you.
Okay, so that has to be fixed.
So with the bracha, whatever.
That's big deal.
It's certainly making enough. You mean that it has a spoon or a screwdriver?
Right. Well, I'm not even thinking about screwdriver. The question is, the guy says I never ever do it.
Sometimes putting
So what's not being done?
No, it's like a spoon because it's really a tray. It's a glass thing.
On the other hand, most people don't use it for that.
No, so if you use it occasionally for that, if you're a person who occasionally uses that, means no, that's still it's a normal regular use. It's not a screwdriver. No, it's not. A screwdriver is not just like off the wall. It's more like a pocket knife. It has different kinds of uses. Some people use it this way, some people that way. It's not off the wall for a person to put food onto a glass tray. Okay, no, okay. So one last thing that I'm not going to talk to you about that has to do with this, and then we'll move on with your unless you want to work out. That is this. There's another question that has to do with temporary using, a different type of question, which is if I go to someone's house who doesn't table his dishes, or I go to a hotel owned by a Jewish person, he doesn't table his dishes, whether I'm allowed to temporarily use it without doing tevillas kelim. We're going to save that for Halacha Yudal. Okay. However, you'll see how it fits into Halacha Yudal. Mitzvah. Okay. Okay. Now, next, another question. Not really related, even though it may sound like it. And that is like this. That is a question of whether you chayv in tevillas kelim for disposable aluminum pans. Okay. We're going to work with the assumption, we took this way a long time ago, at the very beginning, that aluminum is chayv in tevillah with the bracha. Okay. We'll work with that assumption that regular aluminum have a pot. That's a permanent regular pot that's chayv in tevillas kelim with the bracha if it's aluminum. Okay. We're assuming that. Okay. So it turns out that there are three different shittas about whether a disposable aluminum pan needs tevillah, doesn't need tevillah. Two of them we're going to understand more easily, and the third one is going to be more difficult to understand. Okay? The first is a shitta that they say over from Rabbi Yashiv. I saw it in more than one place. The one that seemed most reputable to me was Rabbi Menashe Klein, who says, I think that that's correct, that chayv in tevillas kelim. It's a clay. He says, what's the difference? A pot is a pot. What's the difference? It's chayv in tevillas kelim. He says, yes, Rabbi Yashiv. Rabbi Yashiv told him most of it's chayv in tevillas kelim. And that's a pretty straightforward. I mean, what is it? It's a pan. So a pan is a pan. A pan is chayv in tevillas kelim. Okay. Metal, bought it from a guy, use it for food.
Aluminum is metal.
I said that right. We're working with that assumption that aluminum is metal and it's chayv in tevillah with a bracha. Okay. Whether that's true or not, we talked about some time ago. We're assuming that for now. Okay. That's Rabbi Yashiv, Rabbi Menashe Klein. It's obvious that it's chayv in tevillas kelim. Pasha. Okay. The other extreme is that Dayan Weiss says. He says in Hilchos Tumah V'Tara, metal, a disposable kli is not considered a kli. Okay. Exactly why that is too complicated for us for today. Not so relevant. But he says it's not considered a disposable kli is not considered a kli. Something you can use just a couple of times is not considered a kli. And now he says now there's the second step, which is, and if it's not a kli in your tumah v'tara, then it's also not considered a kli for tevillas kelim. And therefore it's not chayv in tevillas kelim. Step A, it's not a kli for in hilchos tumah v'tara. Step B is, if it's not a kli for tumah v'tara, then it's not considered a kli to be chayv in tevillas kelim either. Okay? That second point B, we're also not going to talk about today. That's going to be in the gear at the end of the simon when we talk about very large kelim. Okay, then we'll get more into that. That's very negated to that question.
It's negated to this.
It is negated to this, but for this we're accepting it that it's a question. But for this we're accepting it that if something is not a kli for tumah v'tara, then it's not chayv in tevillas kelim. Okay, so Dayan Weiss says so it's not chayv in tevillas kelim. Nothing does not chayv in tevillas kelim. Okay, so that second sheet again we can understand. Okay, these two extreme sheets we can understand. Okay. And in fact, that's the Sirchi's position. Okay, it's in our Pesach guide. That makes you feel better. That's our official position that foil pans, disposable pans, don't need tevillas kelim. Okay, they don't need tevillas kelim. Fine. Okay. The harder sheet to understand is a sheet that says that if you're going to use the pan just once, you don't need to do tevillas kelim. If you can use it more than once, then you have to tevillah, meaning you have to tevillah even before your first time you use it. Okay? Now, I'm about to say. So that shita is set over by a number of different talmidim for Moshe, from Moshe Feinstein. Rabbi First, Rabbi Felder, Rabbi Bluth, Rabbi Heinemann says it also. I don't remember if he quotes Rabbi Moshe as saying that, but a number of Talmidim from Moshe say that if you use it more than one time, then you can mechuyev in tevillah even from the beginning. There's a printed tshuva in English Moshe about whether disposable pans need tevilah's Keilim. In that tshuva, if you read that tshuva, you would be convinced that he thinks what I said to you as a second sheet, which is that it's not chayv in tevilah's Keilim. He goes to explains that disposable Keilim are not considered Keilim for chestum of Tara. He says, and tevilah's Keilim follow the rules of Tumah V'Tara, and therefore it's not chayv in tevilah's Keilim. He says even if you're going to use it, it's still not going to be a kli. And everything you read, when you read that tshuva, tells you that he thinks that it's not chayv in tevilah's Keilim ever.
Wait, so it depends if it can be used multiple times.
It can be used
once.
What?
So it can be used multiple times.
Right.
So
Correct. So, but everything you read from the tshuva, if you didn't know anything and you read that tshuva, you would say Rav Moshe holds that disposable pans don't need tevilah's Keilim. If you read the tshuva, you would say that. That's definitely what you would say if you read the tshuva. But a whole bunch of his talmidim say that that he said that it needs tevilah's Keilim if you use it more than once. Okay, so
I thought that once you make that decision that you can use it again, then you're chayiv.
no. So that's not what they said. That's not what they said.
What I heard.
That could be you did. That's what they said. There's no that Rav Moshe said if you're going to use it more than once, you're chayiv to even before the first. Okay, now you should know before I go back to Moshe for a second. I forgot to mention I have a article written by somebody writing over psakim from Rav Vosner, where he quotes this also. So Rav Vosner said if you can use it more than once, but there's no explanation given there. So I don't mean supposedly Rav Vosner holds like that, but I don't see with any hezbollah. Just somebody writing over that Rav Vosner said that. So for what it's worth. If you use it once, why do they say if you use it once it's different than many times? I'm going to try to explain that now. I don't know if I can explain it. I'm going to try to explain it. Okay, to say that you never have to tell that's easier to understand. To say if you used it one time, okay, now one time sounds like having to do Dharma. It's nothing to do with that. Okay, like this.
You're explaining a shita which is about Kenega what we mentioned in Shul.
Correct. Okay.
A
A whole bunch of people who said it over in his name.
I asked a member of the Vadrega, and he said that in Moshe's house they used to use disposable. They never. The Moshe attendant told them they never take it. They used to use it until it was shredded, and they never take it.
Okay, so that's what you would think if you read the tshuva. Okay, so that's what you would think. Okay, so there are two. There are really two different parts of the question. I'm going to explain like this. Let me first say what they try to say. The first thing they'll say to you is that the reason why, if you're going to use it a lot of times, then, it's not really disposable. It's really a real kli. You can use it a lot of times. That is reflective of it being a real kli. And if it's a real kli, then it's chayv in tevilah's Keilim. Okay. So now there are two types of questions on that point. Okay. The first thing is, either the kli is disposable and it's not a kli, or it is a kli. Okay? But why should whether it is a kli or not a kli depend on the housewife who decided she's short of 4 pants today or she's not short of pants. If she has 4 pants in her cabinet, she can throw it out. And if this is her last one, she can use it 3 times. Either it's a kli or it's not a kli. In other words, whatever the din is in Hilchos Tumah V'Tara, okay, whatever the people who know Taras will know whether it's a kli or it's not a kli, it shouldn't depend on how many pants are in my cabinet. It shouldn't depend on should we throw this one out? Should we didn't throw this one out? It became a kli, not became a kli. It seems like a little too fickle to be the decision. Whether I can't tell you. I'm not to have an opinion whether it's a kli or not a kli if it's disposable. But seemingly it seemed pretty. You would imagine it doesn't depend on the user who happens to be in the mood of using it twice or not using it twice.
Why shouldn't it depend somewhat? Doesn't it make sense that it depends somewhat on
No. If you would tell me that it depends on what people in the world do. That if most people reuse it or they don't use it, I can understand it also. But it should depend day by day. Today it's a clean.
But if I'm the type, let's say that I can't use my foil pans until they're unusable, then it's clean.
Even if you would tell me that, then it would be by me. I always need to tell them. I don't always need to tell them. That's not what they're saying. They're saying is I have 10 pans in my cabinet. Okay, this one I'm going to throw out. I could use it. This one I'm going to use 3 times. I have to type this one. It's like pan by pan. How can it depend on the person? Okay. And the other type of question is
the problem is depending on the person or depending on the specific pan.
Both of those bother me. Both of those are hard to understand. How do you say that something is a kli or not a kli dependent on someone's whim, or depending on just...
For tevillah, that's how it works. It goes back, right?
Yeah, this is like show.
Okay, so I'll tell you over an Akshavei thing in a second. I don't really get that exactly. But then there's a different thing. Let's say you could explain to me that it depends on my decision. Okay, depending on how I decide to use it, either is or is not a kli. Well, there's another truth for Rav Moshe, which we spoke about, I think it was last time, which is about a pickle jar. Rav Moshe says, the question we had talked about was, if I buy a bottle of pickles from the store, now I want to put, some applesauce into that pickle jar, I have to empty it out. Why don't I have to tevel the glass? It's a glass jar. Why don't I have to tevel it afterwards? So Rav Moshe says, the pickle jar in the store is just packaging materials. It's not considered a kli. No custom of time, that's not considered a kli. It's not a kli. And since it's not a kli, when I decide to use it for applesauce, I decide to put something else into it, I'm the one who made it into a kli, and therefore, it's not chayiv. I bought from the guy a piece of material, a piece of glass that was not chayiv in tevillah, a plain piece of glass, and I made it into a kli. If I made it into a kli, then it's not chayiv in tevillah's Keilim. A yid made it into a kli. Okay, so why isn't this, if the foil pan depends on my decision, when I decide I'm going to use it 3 times, now it's a kli, and if you decide you're not, it's not a kli, then, because?
The jar was, the manufacturer put the jar as a packaging.
Yes.
They tell you, okay, you can do what you want with it.
Okay, so that's true. It's not as big. It's not as good. So he's right. It's not as bad as the pickle jar, because in the pickle jar, and Mamash had to use beforehand, it was being servicing as a packaging materials until that. Okay. So there's a very long tshuva from Rabbi Bluth about disposable pans. Very long, it's like 10 pages long. It's in Literal Hera, so the pages there are not as long as like in another sefer, but about 10 pages long. In the middle of that tshuva from Rabbi Bluth is a comment from Rav Moshe, which is about a page long, which is essentially the tshuva that's printed in English Moshe. Okay, it's a comment in the middle of it. Okay, so Rabbi Bluth starts off saying that he's convinced it's chayiv in tevillah. Then Rav Moshe quote stops in there and says, "Hold on a second, don't get, no, it's not so true." And towards the end of the tshuva, Rabbi Bluth says, okay, so at this point, it's probably not chayiv in tevillah's Keilim. It's probably not chayiv in tevillah's Keilim. But he says, if the person decided to, he says, and if I decide to use it a lot of times, then I made it into a kli. He says, he doesn't say exactly like this. He says, well, why is it in a pickle jar? And then he says, I don't know, he says some funny words. I was going to put them on the screen. I didn't have enough time. He says, if I use it a lot of times, then igloi milsa, that this was meant to be a kli. Okay, and I'm like, what does that mean? Igloi milsa? What is it? Igloi milsa that it was meant to be a kli? Again, because I needed more pants, but I didn't need more pants, so it was igloi milsa. I wasn't really understanding this very well. And I have to tell you, before I go on, I have one last thing to tell you. Before I tell you that, I have to tell you something. When Rabbi Bluth speaks about a person who uses it many times to chayiv in tevillah's Keilim, he doesn't say the same thing that everybody else says in this name of Moshe. Everybody else says if you use it 2-3 times. Okay, Rabbi Bluth, the way he writes it is, I lost my words. He says
twice, just twice.
They say 2 or 3 times. Rabbi Bluth says pa'amim rabbis. Okay, that's his description of the person who's using it more than who's not a disposable kli. So to me, pa'amim rabbis and 2 or 3 times doesn't sound the same thing. 2 to 3 times to me, I mean, what do I know? 2 or 3 times sounds to me like still like in the range of disposable. Instead of using it once, I use it a second time. You know, pa'amim rabbis sounds like that's my pot. Like I use it. Like I'm keeping this as a pot. You know, somehow that doesn't sound the same to me. Okay. But anyhow, so I said, I mean, when Rabbi Bluth says about Akshavei, he doesn't talk about Akshavei like Akshavei in Tumah Atara. He says Akshavei, he says the Rosh says that if you eat inedible foods on Pesach, then you're over for eating chametz on Pesach because of Akshavei. He says, well, this is the same kind of thing, which I didn't exactly get. Okay, so I asked Rabbi first. I said, Rabbi first, you tell the people it's printed in the Agudah Pesach guide. It says he said, actually, yes, it's true. Rav Moshe told him that's what you should do. That you should, if you can use it more than one time, then you need to tevel it even for the first time. So he says, I consider it a kli. So I said to him, how does that make sense? And what about the pickle jar? So he said like this. This is how he explained it. He said, when the company makes those pans, they understand that there are different types of users out there. There are some people who are going to use it once and throw it out, and there are some people who are going to use it many times. They know that there's different types of people out there who use it different ways. So the klis, its status whether the guy has it as a kli, and you bought a kli from him, or whether he had a piece of metal, and you made it into a kli, whether it's going to be a kli or not a kli, he understands that there are different people who use it different ways. So when you choose to use it as a kli, or you choose it to not use it as a kli, that's the igloi milsa, that when the original manufacturer of this thing as a pan, that was made with this type of kavanah. He made 1,000 pans today. 500 of them are for this and 500 are for this. It's sort of, he didn't use the word braver, but it's sort of like we now can figure out that these are the ones that were meant this scale and these are the ones that are not meant this scale. Okay, I can't say that I could really wrap myself around that, but somehow that's what's going on. It's not that it's a clean, it's not, the pickle jar is meant as a packaging material, that's what it is. It is packaging materials. The fact that I decided to make it into a kli, good, so that's, I'm the yid who made it into a kli.
Did he say to make it proper?
Did he say, I'm trying to remember.
In other words, the manufacturer knows it's
Doesn't say.
are going to be used on a regular basis. He doesn't know which ones. But
Right.
he knows a
certain amount will be.
And then the ones who determine.
We'll make that decision. Right, but
That-
what's going, wait, but it's not enough that I have to determine that when he owned it, it was one of those Keilim. Because it has to be that I bought the kli from the guy. If I bought a not kli from the guy, I'm not chayiv. So it's sort of like a braver kind of a thing.
It's like 3% they're going to be in this fashion, and then the Kohanim are the ones who establish which were the 3% that he had the Kabbalah. It's like Ibrahim Muslim afraid.
Somehow it works like that. What? Okay, yeah, okay, fine. So, somehow like that. Okay. Anyhow, so that's the sheet. Again, as I said to you, in that good guide there, Rabbi first tells people to do this, and many other people who are Talmid and Ramesh, who say so, Ramesh said it. It's hard to believe when you, especially when you read it in Rabbi Booth's Florida. He starts with saying, I think it needs to be Tevillas Keilim. Ramesh is like, hello, stop, no, I don't agree with that. And then Rabbi Booth goes on to the next, 10 pages afterwards. You sure don't get the feeling. And again, everybody who reads, when you read the tshuva by yourself, not knowing anything, you would think that it's not, which is in fact, that's what the Seir sheet tells people. But there's this other sheet out there that says that it is chayiv depending on how many times you use it.